Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. I'm Claudia and today I'm reviewing Fresh by Margot Wood, a young adult novel from 2021, which is also a modern retelling of Jane Austen's novel Emma. I love Emma, it's one of my favourite Jane Austen novels, so I was naturally curious about what a modern retelling might look like. If you're familiar with the 90s film Clueless, you already know a modern retelling of Emma. But Fresh takes a bit of a different approach, though I'm sorry to say that it's not a particularly fresh one. This novel is set at Emerson College, which I googled, and it is a real private university in Boston. We follow Elliot McHugh, who is, in her own words, beautiful, charming and upper middle class, as she starts her degree there. Elliot, who's had some bad experiences in previous relationship, vows to not let herself be tied down and to enjoy her life as a university student to the fullest. Which means, in her case, a lot of parties, a lot of sex and not a lot of studying. Right at the beginning of the book, she meets one Rose Knightley, who is the RA at her student dorms. I looked this up, and it seems to be basically a babysitter for grown adults. Americans are weird, and so the reader follows Elliot through the ups and downs of friendships and relationships and her own journey to finding herself. If all of this sounds a bit trite, it's because it is. But I want to make it very clear that this generic girl goes to university and discovers herself setup is not what put me off the book. There's so many ways to turn that premise, familiar though it is, into a really fun novel. And that's what this book promises. It says right here on the cover, fun and funny, sexy and sex positive. It is sex positive, I'll give it that. As for the rest, I think the biggest disappointment for me was its lack of humour, which admittedly is a question of taste, but for me the jokes just didn't land. The humour in Jane Austen's Emma is both in her characterization, in particular those side characters we adore like Miss Bates or Mrs. Elton, and also in her skills as a satirical narrator. Fresh doesn't really manage that. There was exactly one bit where the book made me actually laugh. And that's a footnote in which Elliot, as the first person narrator, asks the reader to give this book 5 stars on Goodreads. I thought that was very cheeky and a cute bit of fourth wall breaking. Other than that, the jokes just didn't land for me. Another element I missed was the pre-existing friendship between Elliot, who's Emma, and Rose, who's Knightley. A big part of how their romantic relationship evolves in the book Emma is that they know each other so well. How they go from very old, very close friends with a well-developed back and forth in which Knightley is patronising and Emma is entitled, to have romantic feelings for each other, and in the process they learn to value each other in a whole new way. In Fresh, Elliot meets Rose on her very first day at university. They don't have that established bond, and even though the book tries to set Rose up as some sort of authority figure by making her an RA, it doesn't quite appeal in the same way it does in Emma. Something else I found grating in this book, and this is a big one, is the voice of this first-person narrative. I found it way too immature for an 18-year-old university student. There's a disconnect between the writing style and the subject matter. For the most part, I like how Emma's character is translated into the 21st century here. In Jane Austen's novels, she wants to stay single and never marry. In this one, she wants to stay single and have lots of casual sex. She's confident, often too confident, and lacks common sense in many parts of the book. She's quite insensitive, just like Emma, and more than a little self-absorbed. This is, by all means, a young adult book tackling young adult subjects. Sex, obviously, but also university, privilege, drugs, all the things you'd expect from a novel with this premise. But the writing style is more suited to a middle grade book with a 12 or 13-year-old protagonist. Elliot is living and acting like a modern university student, but her inner monologue is so childish. It really takes you out of the novel in parts. It also feels a bit dated. There's lists and footnotes, and overall it reminded me a lot of the books I read as a teenager 20 years ago. While it's certainly a bold and characterful voice for Eliot, it doesn't feel particularly, fresh. As a side note, the narrator insists on using the phrase tender chicken to describe female sexual arousal, like, quote from the book, the female version of a boner. And every instance of this phrase, including saying it out loud right now, made me actively cringe. Why write a book about a sexually adventurous and confident young woman and then litter it with cutesy toddler words, straight out of the vocabulary of a repressed wallflower? What I also found a bit off-putting, though that's probably more to do with the setting being an American university, is how the characters are treated like children. There was a scene where Rose tells the students something like, "I better not find you with booze in your rooms," which reads a bit strange until I remembered that Americans can't legally drink until they're like 56. Coming from a country where the drinking age is 16 and university students are treated like adults, this was more than a bit jarring. But again, I can't blame the book for that if it's just realistic world building. Anyway, let's get back to characterization. Jane Austen's Emma Woodhouse is a meddler. She's so bored with her own life that she finds enjoyment only in the lives of others. Eliot, on the other hand, is so self-absorbed that she barely notices other people even exist. That's just another fundamental aspect of Austen's novel that is lost in this retelling. The other thing that's noticeable is the absence of those really unique characters, in particular those of the older generation. Every bit of the dramatic, controlling hypochondriac that's Mr. Woodhouse has been flattened. And what's left in fresh is a father who's sensible, supportive, and generally speaking, a rational man. Less toxic for sure, but also less interesting as a character. And where is Mrs. Weston? She's such an important part of the original book as Emma's confidant, as her good conscience in many parts, and of course as an object of her meddling. Fresh really lacks that three-dimensionality in its cast that Emma has. Everyone is a college student. They all do the same things, they all, broadly speaking, work the same way, and most frustratingly, they all sound the same, which is not a compliment. If all the characters in one book have the same way of speaking, the same verbal habits, the same ways of expressing themselves, then that means the author is simply inserting her own voice into their mouths that she failed to make these college kids distinct from each other. Eliot's fear of commitment is the main thing for her to overcome, in a similar way to Emma Woodhouse's fear of commitment. Emma does this by obsessive matchmaking, which is a symptom of her living vicariously through her friends and acquaintances, so she doesn't have to confront her own wants and desires. Eliot in Fresh tries to overcome it by casually sleeping with her fellow students, and when that doesn't work, by trying to do relationships, but without actually making herself vulnerable and committing. This is an interesting approach to the problem, but the book doesn't give her internal conflict the respect it deserves. Everything is so surface level, so shallow, that I found it hard to care about Eliot's issues and whether or not she'd be able to face them by the end of the novel. There's that moment in Emma, right at the end. Oh yeah, I'm about to spoil Emma by Jane Austen, so if you don't want to hear about what happens in Emma by Jane Austen, jump to this timestamp. Got it? Spoiler for Emma coming right up. Right. Now we've lost the 3 people watching this who have not read Emma by Jane Austen. So this moment right at the end, when everything comes crashing down and Emma fully realizes the consequences of her actions, how she's messed with poor Harriet Smith, how she's managed to alienate her closest friends with her off-putting behavior, how she's probably alienated Knightley just when she realizes she's in love with him. Fresh really lacks those emotionally punchy moments. The romance plot with Rose lacks chemistry. The friendship plot with Lucy, who's this version's Harriet Smith, lacks depth. The side characters are all more or less forgettable, which is a shame. Overall, this is a fun premise for an updated version of Emma which disappoints in its execution. And I'm fully aware that this is very much my personal tastes. This book has a Goodreads rating of 3.86 stars, so my opinion is clearly not a majority one. I always ask the question in my reviews of whether I can recommend a book or not. And with Fresh, the answer is still kind of yes, but with big caveats. Do pick it up if you're after a modern YA retelling of Emma, if you want to read a sex-positive book set at a university with a queer romance plot. It's an easy read, it's a fast read, and it kept me entertained enough to make it through to the end. Very much mixed feelings on this one. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!